So what's up next on your study guide here is the differences between Oomycota and other fungi. So we'll make a column here for Oomycota and one for Otrofungi. Other fungi. Okay, so columns, I like them. Okay, so Oomycota, we'll get to in a second. With fungi, you may recall that their cell walls are made of chitin. If you don't, well, now you know. Chitin cell walls. With Oomycota, what we see are cell walls largely composed of cellulose. Now, cellulose is what we typically see in, well, what we see in plants. There's other things in there, but it's pretty much all cellulose. So there's one contrast. Cellulose cell walls versus chitin cell walls. Then you may recall all your life cycles in the other fungi were zygotic life cycles. See? Zygotic life cycle. What that means is that the only diploid structure in that phase is a zygote, and mitosis happens in the haploid stage. Brief definition of zygotic life cycle. In this case, what you're looking at in Oomycota is a gametic life cycle, which means that the only haploid stage in this life cycle is the gametes, and mitosis takes place in the diploid stage. And just fun fact, with the sporic life cycle, mitosis takes place in both. So, both stages. So, gametic life cycle versus zygotic life cycle. Gametic is what we are, just by the way, so that makes this fungi a bit different than the other one. The other difference is the fertilization type. With other fungi, we typically saw isogamy, and with the Oomycota, we see oogamy, or oogamy if you prefer. If you're not sure of the differences between these guys, with isogamy, iso means same, and gametes, so same gametes. Basically, you're looking at gametes. There's two of them, they're identical, and they're both either modal or they're both non-modal. So, that's isogamy. With anisogamy, what you'll have is, again, you'll have two gametes. They're different sizes, but they're still either both modal or they're non-modal. With oogamy, what you have is you have two gametes. One, they're both different sizes, but one of them is modal and the other is non-modal. So if you think about humans, you've got your egg, larger, circly, does not move. And you've got the sperm, which are little and tiny, and they move a lot. So, pop. There we go. That's oogamy. Oomycota has it. Other fungi have isogamy, which means the gametes look the same. So, up next is the ecological and commercial values of diatoms. Diatoms are phylum Basilaria phyta. They're in the heterocont, so they have those two flagella, which are whiplash and tinsel. In case you've forgotten, you can re-jot that down. Assuming you're taking notes, which you may not be. That's cool. But it's important to note that ecology relates to the environment surrounding it. So the ecological role is going to be different than the commercial role. Because the ecological role is the role it plays in nature, and commercial is what we use it for. Sorry about the cough again. Okay, so ecological value of diatoms. You may recall from lab that we call these guys the algae that live in glass houses because their cell walls are made of silicon dioxide. Just kind of remember that, if that helps you remember it. So, in the ecological sense, they are primary producers, which means they make their own food and they're part of the food chain. They're kind of the lowest step on that food chain. And they're also important phytoplankton organisms, which means they live in the ocean. Well, the ones that live in the ocean definitely are phytoplankton, sorry. They're a very important part of the ocean food chain as well as other food chains. So those kind of sort of go together. And they produce, and here's the kicker here, they produce 8 times the oxygen than all flowering plants. So, they're cool. Okay, so, ecological roles. Primary producers, phytoplankton, and they produce 8 times the oxygen more than flowering plants do. So, that may leave you to wonder, well, what do we use them for? That would be their commercial use. We use them in road paint. We use them in toothpaste. We use them in cosmetics. It really comes in with diatomaceous earth. And you may remember looking at this in lab. We had a slide that you're supposed to look at called diatomaceous earth. Basically, you probably saw what looked like a bunch of glass. That was the broken up diatoms. So, commercial diatomaceous earth is the main thing, but it's used in road paint. It's used in cosmetics. It's used in toothpaste. It's basically used in anything we need to be abrasive. So, if we need something abrasive, we make it. So, that is the ecological and commercial value of diatoms. Okay. Alright, so up next is the differences between pinnate and centric diatom shapes. So, I've drawn a centric diatom and a pinnate diatom. Basically, where the differences fall in this is actually symmetry. Centric, no matter where you divide it, it's going to come out evenly. So that means, like, no matter where I draw that line, it's going to be an even half, either way. So that makes them radially symmetric, or that they have radial symmetry. So radial symmetry. With pinnate, it's not the same case, because I can divide it one way, I can divide it one other way, but I can't divide it any more than those 2 ways. I can only divide it into a half long ways, or I can divide it into a half widthwise. So that makes it bilaterally symmetric, or gives it bilateral symmetry. And so, bilateral symmetry. As of now, we have not really found any diatoms that are asymmetric. So right now they fall into pinnate or centric. So remember, centric is radial. If you can cut it 3 or more ways, like a pizza, it's probably centric. If it's pinnate, you can only cut it basically 2 ways. Maybe it's not even 2 sometimes. So, bear that in mind. Up next is the habitats of heteroconts. Funnily enough, I've been reading this habits all day, which makes no sense whatsoever. So habitats of heteroconts makes a lot more sense. So, with the habitats of heteroconts, we come across this word that I promise you, if you have me your page, which you have no choice in that matter, you have me your page for lab, you will hear this word again. And that word is Ubiquitous. Looks like that. Promise it's a real word. Ubiquitous. It means that they can be found anywhere. And keeping in mind that heteroconts include the diatoms, your brown algae, your green algae, and even your water molds. I'm just going to let you know, algae's everywhere. Like, it's in the air, it's in the ground, it's in the water, it's in fresh water, it's in salt water. It's everywhere. It can grow on rocks, it can grow under rocks, it even can grow in the cracks of rocks, and there's special terms for all of this. Because as scientists, we are very particular about where we find our algae and what we call it when we do. But what you need to know is they're ubiquitous and they can be found anywhere. So, how cool is that? Alright, the next thing is the evidence of convergent evolution in brown algae and higher plants. It's a long way of sort of saying, what is it about brown algae and higher plants that proves that these guys evolved from each other, that they evolved together? And where that comes in, sorry, is sieve tube elements. Sieve tube elements. So if you're just a happy little kelp over here, and you're growing in the ocean, and you got your extremely long blade because you're one of those big kelps, and you grow on the bottom of the ocean, so there's your happy little kelp. I almost put a smiley face on it. I won't do that. But what you're looking at is where you're attached down here. There's no light down here. It's very dark at the bottom of the ocean. There's no light. So you're having to photosynthesize way up here at the top where there is light. So in these brown algae, there are sieve tube elements. And they're just these little guys. They're going to run all the way down, connect to different points, and they're going to run all the way down the brown algae. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to take the nutrients you've made up here and carry them all the way down to the bottom of the plant. So the other place you see these guys in your higher plants are in the phloem tissue. So in higher plants, you see it in the phloem tissue. And basically, that's what pulls the nutrients throughout the plant. So the fact that these developed in two separate guys tells us that it's convergent evolution. So they developed together. Alright, so the commercial value of brown algae, and I'm just going to go ahead and apologize because you're probably going to want to rethink your life after this. You use it primarily as a stabilizer and an emulsifier. An emulsifier just means a thickening agent. So we use it a lot in foods to thicken stuff up. Not sure how many of you guys grew up eating Jell-O. I know I did. It's in that. It's in ice cream. It's in mayonnaise. It's in paint. I don't recommend you eat that. But if you did, you'd be eating brown algae. Interestingly enough, when you say, what do you find brown algae in, which includes some seaweeds, people are like, oh, it's in your sushi. It's not actually. That's red algae. But basically what they use for brown algae is they use these things they produce called carrageenans and algin. And basically they can pull those out and put them in foods and thicken it up. It's also in pudding. So pudding, ice cream, Jell-O, mayonnaise, all of them have brown algae in them. So really, there's no real difference between you eating ice cream yesterday and you eating ice cream tomorrow. It's just now you know. So, sorry if that disturbed your life. But that's how it's used.